There's something about working the night shift at a gas station that makes you notice things others don't. When you're alone at 3 a.m., watching the occasional truck rumble past on Interstate 40, your mind starts picking up on patterns. That's how I first realized something was wrong in Millbrook, Arizona. My name is Susan Mitchell, and I used to work the graveyard shift at Pete's Gas & Go, just off exit 27. The station sat at the edge of what used to be a thriving mining town in the 1950s, before the copper dried up and everyone moved on. Now it's mostly empty buildings and sun-bleached memories. I first noticed the pattern in late August 2023. Every third night, like clockwork, a black SUV with tinted windows would pull up at exactly 2:47 a.m. The driver never got out. Instead, 3 men in dark blue jumpsuits would emerge from the passenger side and back seats. They'd buy the same things every time: 4 gallons of water, all our batteries, and whatever energy drinks we had in stock. After the third time, I tried making small talk with them. They never responded, just placed their items on the counter and stared straight ahead. Their faces were always covered with surgical masks, not unusual since COVID, but something about the way they wore them seemed off. My coworker, Jake, thought I was paranoid.
They're probably just workers at that new construction site out by the old mines,
he said one morning during shift change. But I knew that site had been abandoned months ago. The development company just vanished one day, leaving their equipment behind. It wasn't until September 15th that I got my first real clue something was seriously wrong. That night, one of the men dropped something while carrying supplies to their vehicle. It looked like a key card, white with a strange symbol, a black triangle inside a red circle with the letters DRCP underneath. I shouldn't have picked it up. I shouldn't have pocketed it. And I definitely shouldn't have shown it to my best friend, Marcus, who worked as a local historian at what remained of the Millbrook Museum.
DRCP,
Marcus said, examining the key card under his desk lamp.
Deep Rock Containment Protocol. It was a government program back in the 50s, something to do with the mines. Most of the records were destroyed, but I found references to it while digitizing old newspaper archives.
That's when Marcus showed me something that made my blood run cold. It was a photograph dated June 1957, showing a massive bunker door being installed into the side of a mountain. The same symbol from the key card was clearly visible on the door.
The thing is,
Marcus continued,
according to official records, this bunker never existed. The mine it was supposedly built into also doesn't exist. But I found dozens of references to both in personal journals and letters from that time period. People talked about strange sounds coming from the mountain at night, workers who went missing. And then, in October 1957, the whole thing just disappeared from public discussion, like someone threw a switch and everyone forgot about it.
I should have left it alone. Should have thrown away the key card and forgotten about the whole thing. But curiosity is a dangerous thing, especially when mixed with the kind of boredom that comes from living in a dying town. Marcus and I spent the next week exploring the old mining roads, comparing the photograph to the current landscape. The mountains hadn't changed much in 66 years. It took us 3 days, but we finally found it. A steep path hidden behind overgrown brush, leading to what looked like a solid rock face. But we both knew better. The rock was too smooth, too perfectly vertical. And when I held up the key card, a small red light blinked to life in what I'd thought was just another crack in the stone.
We should call someone,
Marcus said.
The police or...
And tell them what? That we found a secret government bunker using a stolen key card? That we've been stalking mysterious men in jumpsuits? I placed my hand on the cool metal surface hidden beneath decades of artificial rock facing. We're already here. Don't you want to know what they're hiding? The door opened with a hydraulic hiss that seemed impossibly well maintained for something so old. Inside, emergency lights flickered to life, revealing a corridor that stretched deep into the mountain. The air that rushed out was cold and carried a metallic taste that made me gag. We should have turned back when we heard the whispers. Should have run when we saw the scratch marks on the walls, long, deep gouges in solid steel that no human could have made. But we didn't. We kept going, our flashlight beams dancing over walls covered in warning signs and evacuation procedures dated 1957. And then we found the first body. It was wearing one of those blue jumpsuits, but the fabric was shredded, revealing what remained of the person inside. I say, what remained, because it looked wrong. The proportions weren't right. The limbs were too long, the joints bent in impossible directions. And the skin, what was left of it, had a translucent quality, like wax paper held up to light.
Susan,
Marcus whispered, his voice shaking.
look at the ID badge.
The photo showed a normal man, maybe in his 30s. The date on the badge was from 3 days ago. That's when we heard the screaming. The scream echoed through the corridor, bouncing off the steel walls until it seemed to come from everywhere at once. It wasn't the kind of scream you hear in horror movies. This was different. It started as human but twisted into something else, like someone's vocal cords were being restructured mid-cry.
We need to leave.
Marcus whispered, already backing toward the entrance.
Right now.
But the sound of heavy machinery whirring to life behind us quickly killed that plan. The bunker door was closing, its hydraulic systems apparently programmed to seal automatically after a certain time. We were trapped. Our flashlight beams revealed 3 diverging corridors ahead. The leftmost passage had partially collapsed, but the other 2 seemed intact. Each was marked with a different color stripe along its walls, blue for the middle, red for the right.
Look at this,
Marcus said, pointing to a faded placard on the wall. Through the dust, we could make out Sector B, blue, research and development, Sector R, red, containment and storage, Sector Y, yellow, redacted, Level 5 clearance required. The yellow marked corridor was the collapsed one. Maybe that was for the best. We chose the blue path, reasoning that research facilities might have answers, or at least working communications equipment. The passage sloped downward at a gentle angle, taking us deeper into the mountain. Every 50 feet or so, we passed heavy steel doors. Most were sealed, but a few stood open, revealing rooms full of ancient computer equipment and lab stations.
This doesn't make sense.
Marcus muttered as we examined one of the labs.
Look at this.
He pointed to a monitor that was still glowing with activity.
This isn't 1950s technology. This isn't even 2020s technology. This is something else entirely.
He was right. The equipment looked advanced, but in a way that was hard to define. It was like looking at a smartphone from an alternate timeline where technology developed along completely different lines. In one room, we found what appeared to be medical records, hundreds of files, many dated within the last month. They documented something called the Evolution Project, but the technical language was beyond my understanding. What I did grasp made me wish I hadn't looked at all. Subject 23 continues to show an unprecedented adaptation rate, one report read. Skeletal restructuring complete within 36 hours. Epidermis now displays 89% light transmittance. Subject remains conscious throughout transformation, despite previous assumptions about pain tolerance thresholds. Another file contained before and after photographs that made Marcus vomit into a trash can. I won't describe them. I can't. Some things, once seen, infect your mind like a virus. We were about to leave the room when the lights flickered and died, plunging us into darkness broken only by our flashlights. Then came a sound from further down the corridor, the click, click, click of something hard against metal flooring. Like footsteps, but too many of them, moving with an unnatural rhythm. We pressed ourselves against the wall behind a row of filing cabinets. My flashlight caught Marcus's face, pale and drawn. He was mouthing something.
Don't move.
The clicking grew louder. A shadow passed by the door, something tall and thin, its movements jerky and insectile. I could hear it breathing, a wet, raspy sound that reminded me of plastic sheets rustling in the wind. Then came the voices, human voices, from the direction we'd come from. Life signs detected in Sector B, 2 signatures, unauthorized presence confirmed. Deploy containment team, potential exposure risk, maximum, new specimen acquisition authorized. The thing in the hallway stopped moving. Its head, at least I think it was its head, turned toward the voices. Then it made a sound, a high-pitched keening that felt like needles in my eardrums. Other sounds answered from deeper in the facility. Similar sounds. Many of them.
Oh God,
Marcus breathed.
they're hunting us.
A new alarm began to blare through the facility. Warning, containment breach in Sector R, multiple specimens mobile, security teams to emergency stations. Warning, containment breach. We were caught between the security teams and whatever had escaped. But as terrifying as the security forces seemed, the sounds echoing from deeper in the facility were worse. Much worse.
The files.
Marcus whispered urgently.
In the cabinet behind you. There might be something about another way out.
I began rifling through folders as quietly as possible, my trembling hands making the papers rustle far too loudly. And then I found it. A facility map, dated 2022. According to the map, there was a maintenance shaft that led to a secondary exit, originally used to bring in heavy equipment during the facility's construction. The exit point was in Sector R. Of course it was. Everything important was always in the worst possible place. We'd have to go through the containment sector, where those things had escaped, but with armed security teams closing in from behind, did we have a choice? That's when we heard the screaming start again. Only this time, it was coming from where the security team had been. The sounds of gunfire erupted, then were suddenly cut short. Something heavy hit the floor with a wet thud. Marcus grabbed my arm.
Run! Now!
We sprinted into the darkness, our flashlights bouncing wildly off the walls. Behind us, the screams turned to gurgling sounds. Then, silence. The clicking noises resumed, faster now. Hunting sounds. As we ran, I realized something that made my blood freeze. The things weren't chasing us. They were herding us. Every time we tried to turn back or take a different route, one of them would appear, forcing us to go deeper into the facility, deeper into Sector R. They were driving us exactly where they wanted us to go. The entrance to Sector R was marked by a massive decontamination chamber. Emergency lights cast everything in a bloody red glow, making the warning signs on the walls look like they were written in fresh blood. Biological hazard. Mutation risk. Extreme. No unauthorized access. In case of containment breach, initiate Omega Protocol. The heavy steel doors leading into the sector had been torn open from the inside. The metal was warped and twisted like tissue paper, and deep gouges marked the surface. Whatever had done this was impossibly strong.
Look at the floor.
Marcus whispered, pointing his flashlight beam down. Dark stains made a trail into the sector, accompanied by long smears that suggested multiple bodies had been dragged through. Recent bodies, judging by how fresh some of the stains appeared. We had no choice but to follow the trail. The sounds behind us were getting closer, and the maintenance shaft was our only hope of escape. According to the map, it was located near something labeled primary containment. The corridor beyond the decontamination chamber was wider than those in Sector B, with higher ceilings and reinforced walls. Every 100 feet or so, we passed containment cells with thick observation windows. Most were empty, their doors torn open from within. But some still had occupants. In one cell, we saw what looked like a man fused with the wall, his flesh seamlessly merging with the concrete. His eyes followed us as we passed, but where his mouth should have been, there was only smooth skin. Another cell contained something that might have once been human, but had grown additional limbs, too many to count. It pressed itself against the window as we hurried past, leaving streaks of translucent slime on the glass. "What were they doing here?" I whispered. As if in answer, we came across a partially destroyed terminal still displaying a document. Project Evolution, Phase 3, Top Secret, Level 5, Clearance Required. Human evolution has stagnated. Our species faces extinction unless we can adapt to the coming changes. Traditional genetic engineering has failed. The entity discovered in Mine Shaft 7 provides new possibilities. Exposure to the entity's biomass triggers rapid evolutionary responses. Subjects display unprecedented physical adaptation capabilities. Consciousness remains intact throughout transformation, though psychological stability varies. Warning: entity displays possible intelligence. Multiple containment breaches suggest coordinated behavior. Recommend immediate termination of program. Override: project continues by direct order. The entity's potential for advancing human evolution outweighs risks. Increase security protocols and continue testing. The document was dated 1 week ago.
They found something in the mines.
Marcus said, his voice shaking.
Something old, and they've been experimenting with it, using it to try to evolve people.
A distant scream cut through the facility, followed by the sound of tearing metal. The creatures were getting closer. We ran deeper into the sector, passing more cells, more horrors. Some of the transformed humans reached for us as we passed, their limbs stretching impossibly through gaps in their cell doors. Others just watched with eyes that looked too aware, too intelligent. Then we found the central containment chamber. It was massive, easily 50 feet high and twice as wide. In the center stood a column of thick glass that stretched from floor to ceiling. Inside was nothing but broken glass and twisted metal restraints.
That's where they kept it.
Marcus breathed.
The entity. Whatever they found in the mine. But it's gone now. It's...
A new sound cut him off. Not the clicking or scuttling we'd heard before. This was different. Wet. Massive. Like a giant heart beating somewhere in the darkness. The sound was coming from behind us. We turned slowly, our flashlights revealing something that defied comprehension. It filled the corridor, a mass of shifting flesh and translucent tissue. Parts of it looked human, faces, limbs, torsos, but they merged and flowed into each other like wax melting in extreme heat. And throughout its mass, human eyes blinked and stared, all moving independently, but with terrible intelligence. "Run!" I screamed, but Marcus stood frozen, staring at the thing. His flashlight beam illuminated something in its mass, a face he recognized.
"Dad,"
he whispered. Then I remembered. Marcus's father had disappeared 3 months ago while hiking near the old mines. The police had found his car, but no other traces. The thing surged forward, and Marcus didn't move. I grabbed his arm, trying to pull him away, but he resisted.
"It's calling me,"
he said, his voice distant.
"It wants to show us the next step. What we can become. What we have to become."
The mass reached out with a dozen limbs, pulling Marcus into itself. I heard him scream, not in pain, but in ecstasy. His flesh began to ripple and flow like hot wax. I ran. Behind me, I heard Marcus's voice, distorted but still recognizable.
"Susan, come back. It's beautiful. It's what we were meant to be."
I didn't look back. I couldn't. I just ran, following the emergency signs pointing to the maintenance shaft, trying to ignore the sounds of pursuit and the wet slapping of something massive moving through the corridors behind me. The shaft was there, just as the map had shown. a vertical tunnel with a maintenance ladder leading up into darkness. As I began to climb, I heard Marcus's voice again, closer now.
Why are you running, Susan? Don't you want to evolve?
The maintenance shaft seemed endless. My arms burnt as I climbed, the rusty rungs of the ladder slick with moisture. Below, the sounds of pursuit echoed up the shaft, wet, slithering noises punctuated by Marcus's voice, growing less human with each call.
We can be so much more, Susan. We can transcend our limitations. Join us. Join me.
The voice was closer now, and I made the mistake of looking down. In the beam of my flashlight, I saw something rising up the shaft after me. It moved like liquid mercury, flowing up the walls rather than climbing. Within its translucent mass, faces formed and dissolved. Some I recognized from the missing persons reports that had plagued Millbrook for months. And at the front, leading the pursuit, was what remained of Marcus. His face was still recognizable, but it kept shifting, multiple sets of eyes opening and closing across his features. His body had elongated, merging with the mass behind him, and extra limbs sprouted and retracted as he moved.
The entity showed me the truth.
Marcus's voice echoed up the shaft.
We're not meant to be single beings, Susan. Individuality is an evolutionary dead end. Unity is the future. Perfect adaptation. Perfect communion.
I climbed faster, my muscles screaming in protest. The beam of my flashlight revealed something above me, a horizontal tunnel branching off from the shaft. A faded sign marked it as Emergency Exit B. As I pulled myself into the tunnel, I heard a new sound from below, a deep, resonant pulse that seemed to vibrate through the entire mountain. The entity was coming, all of it. The tunnel was narrow, forcing me to crouch as I ran. Every few yards, emergency lights flickered weakly, providing just enough illumination to avoid tripping over the debris that littered the floor. Old equipment, tools, and other things I tried not to look at too closely. Behind me, the sound of pursuit changed. No more slithering or flowing, it was now a cacophony of footsteps, as if dozens of people were running after me. The transformed security team had joined the hunt. I found a door marked Security Station C and ducked inside, hoping to find weapons or at least a place to hide. Instead, I found answers I wasn't prepared for. The security station's monitors were still active, displaying camera feeds from throughout the facility. Most showed static or darkness, but one screen caught my attention. It showed the central containment chamber where we'd found the entity's empty prison. But it wasn't empty in this recording. The timestamp showed it was from 1957, the year the facility was supposedly built. In the glass column, something shifted and moved, something that looked like liquid darkness. As I watched, text scrolled across the bottom of the screen. Entity appears to respond to human presence. Tests confirm it can alter organic matter at the molecular level. Subjects exposed to entity biomass display rapid physical adaptation, followed by psychological changes. Most concerning is the development of a hive mind consciousness. Subjects report joining with something greater, recommend immediate termination. The rest was corrupted, but another file was open on a nearby terminal. Final report, October 12, 2023. The entity is not extraterrestrial as originally believed. Carbon dating of samples suggests it predates human evolution. It appears to be terrestrial in origin, lying dormant until our mining operations disturbed it. Theory: the entity represents an alternative evolutionary path, one based on collective consciousness and adaptive biology. Its ability to modify human DNA suggests it may have influenced human evolution in the distant past. New evidence suggests the entity is not merely transforming subjects, but rebuilding them according to some vast, incomprehensible design. Each transformed subject adds to its intelligence, its understanding of human biology. God help us. We thought we were studying it, but it's been studying us all along. Learning, adapting, waiting. The containment breach was not an escape. It was metamorphosis. To anyone who finds this, run. The entity isn't just transforming individuals anymore. It's trying to transform all of humanity. And after 60 years of studying us, it knows exactly how to... The file ended there. A sound from the doorway made me turn. Marcus stood there, but he'd changed even more. His body was almost entirely transparent now, his organs visible and shifting like they were being constantly reorganized. Behind him, more figures crowded the corridor. The transformed security team, their bodies similarly altered.
I understand now.
Marcus said, his voice resonating from multiple mouths that opened across his body.
Why fight what we're meant to become? The entity isn't our enemy. It's our future, our destiny.
He reached out with an arm that split into dozens of smaller appendages.
Don't be afraid, Susan. Evolution isn't supposed to be comfortable. Change never is. But it's necessary. It's inevitable.
I sprinted past Marcus, ducking under his grasping appendages. My shoulder slammed into one of the transformed security team members, and I felt their flesh give way like warm gelatin. The sensation made me gag, but I kept running. The tunnel ahead split into two paths. The left branch sloped upward, emergency exit signs pointing the way. The right branch led to something marked Omega Protocol Control Center. The facility's warning system suddenly crackled to life. Warning, entity biomass reaching critical concentration, Omega Protocol authorization required, warning, surface breach imminent. I remembered the warning signs we'd seen earlier. In case of containment breach, initiate Omega Protocol. Making a split-second decision, I took the right branch. The control center was a circular room dominated by ancient-looking computer terminals and a massive central console. Above it hung a digital map of the facility and the surrounding mountain. Red areas on the map were spreading like a virus, indicating the entity's progress through the complex. But what made my blood run cold was the topographical display of Millbrook. Red lines extended from the mountain like roots, stretching toward the town. Some had already reached the outskirts.
It's too late to stop it.
Marcus's voice came from behind me. He entered the room, followed by his transformed entourage.
The entity has already spread through the groundwater, microscopic particles waiting to bloom. Everyone in Millbrook has been drinking it for months.
That's when I understood the true horror. The missing people, the strange behaviors I'd noticed in town, the way some of my regular customers at the gas station had started looking slightly different. The transformation had already begun.
Why do you think those men in jumpsuits kept buying water from your store?
Marcus's multiple mouths smiled.
They were monitoring the spread, making sure the water supply stayed contaminated.
I reached for the central console, but Marcus's elongated arm shot out, wrapping around my wrist. His flesh was cold and felt like it was trying to merge with mine.
The Omega Protocol is pointless,
he said.
It was designed to collapse the mountain, bury everything. But the entity is already out, already spreading. In a few days, everyone in Millbrook will be like us. In a few weeks, the whole state. Then the country. Then...
I looked at my wrist where he gripped me. My skin was becoming transparent, revealing the tissue beneath. The change had started. But Marcus had made a mistake. While he talked, his grip had loosened slightly. Just enough. I yanked my arm free, leaving a strip of dissolving skin in his grasp, and slammed my hand down on the main console's activation panel. Alarms blared immediately. Omega Protocol initiated. Detonation in 60 seconds. Please evacuate immediately.
You don't understand,
Marcus said, his voice almost sad.
This won't stop anything. The entity isn't just in the facility anymore. It's everywhere. In the water, in the soil, in the air you're breathing right now. You've only destroyed one small part of it.
The ceiling began to crack as explosive charges detonated throughout the mountain. Marcus and the others didn't even try to run. They stood there, watching me with their too many eyes as I sprinted for the exit. I made it out just as the first major collapse began. The mountain seemed to fold in on itself, tons of rock and earth swallowing the facility and everything inside it. The force of the collapse knocked me off my feet, and I rolled down the slope, coming to rest at the base of the mountain. That was 3 days ago. I'm writing this now from a motel 50 miles away. My right arm, where Marcus grabbed me, has become almost completely transparent. I can see the muscles move when I flex my fingers, watching my tendons slide beneath the clear flesh. The change is spreading slowly up my shoulder. But that's not why I'm writing this. I'm writing because I stopped at a gas station this morning and the cashier's skin looked just a little too clear under the fluorescent lights. Because I've noticed more and more people wearing long sleeves and gloves, even in this heat. Because last night, I looked out my motel window and saw shapes moving in the darkness, their bodies rippling and shifting in ways that human bodies shouldn't move. Marcus was right. The facility was just the beginning. The entity is out here now, spreading, changing people bit by bit. Most of them don't even know it's happening yet. By the time they notice, it'll be too late. I can feel it in my mind now. A vast, alien consciousness slowly seeping in through the cracks in my psyche. It shows me visions of what's coming, of humanity's next step. And part of me, a growing part, thinks it's beautiful. If you're listening to this, look closely at the people around you. Really look. Notice how some of them seem different in subtle ways, how their movements aren't quite right, how their skin sometimes looks just a little too clear. And check your own skin. Really check it, because the entity isn't just patient, it's inevitable. Evolution cannot be stopped. And as I sit here, watching my flesh turn transparent, feeling my mind expand to join something vast and ancient and hungry, I understand a terrible truth. The change isn't coming. It's already here.